My name is Celeste Bishop, and I'm 29 years old. 11 years ago, just 3 days before my 18th birthday, my parents cancelled my birthday party because my older sister cried that it made her feel less special. I moved out that very same night, just 2 duffel bags, a coffee tin with 1 in 300 inside, and 1 phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me on time. What happened 1 year later, at my grandmother's 80th birthday party, right in the middle of a flower field that I planted with my own hands, is the part of this story my family still refuses to say out loud. My sister stood in that field, looked at everything I had built, and completely fell apart. In front of 30 relatives, the fallout split our family straight down the middle, and we've never put those pieces back together. But here's what none of them ever understood. I wasn't the one who shattered our family. I simply stopped holding the pieces together. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where women who were told to stay small finally tell the whole story, calmly, and all the way to the end. If you've ever been the one who was always expected to be fine on your own, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, you'll want to be here when we finally get to that field. But before I can explain the birthday, I have to explain the house. Our family worked like an emergency room. Whoever was bleeding the loudest got everything. The money, the attention, both parents, every single time. And my sister, Brianna, was always the one bleeding the loudest. I was only 7 years old when I finally figured out how the math worked. My 2nd grade recital happened on the very same night Brianna, who was 10 at the time, suddenly developed a stomach ache that somehow disappeared before 9 p.m. Nobody came to hear me sing. On the drive home, my mother explained it with the calm voice of someone balancing a checkbook. Your sister needed us. You did wonderful. I'm sure. When I was 12, I saved enough birthday money to buy myself a pair of white sneakers. Within a week, they became the family's shoes because Brianna decided hers suddenly pinched. Whenever a teacher praised me, Mom somehow managed to make the achievement smaller before it ever reached the dinner table. Quieter, less important, nothing worth celebrating, because in our house, celebrating was reserved for someone else. I want to be completely fair, because fairness is the entire reason I'm telling this story. My parents never hit me. I was fed. I had clothes. They drove me to school. From the outside, everything looked perfectly fine. But inside the Bishop house, being fine wasn't a feeling. It was a job. I was hired for that job at 7 years old, and I never got a single day off. The only person who ever seemed to notice the pattern was my dad. After another ruined evening, he'd catch my eye from across the room, then quietly look away. Like a man watching a storm, he had already accepted he couldn't stop. The summer I turned 15, he found me pulling weeds in Grandma Ruth's flower beds. Without any warning, he smiled and said, 18 is yours, kiddo. Whatever you want. I promise. I buried that promise deeper than anything I ever planted in the ground. That was my biggest mistake, because it took 3 years for that promise to grow into the worst night of my life to understand what happened next. You also have to understand my sister, because this story wasn't exactly fair to Brianna either, just in a very different way. She was 21, 3 years older than me, and by then she'd already enrolled in and dropped out of 2 different colleges. Every time it happened, the pattern was exactly the same. Midnight phone call, a brand new crisis, and my mother rushing into action. Like the National Guard, nobody in our house ever used the word failed. Instead, Brianna wasn't supported enough. Brianna is more sensitive than other people. Every collapse received a brand new explanation until failure sounded like a medical diagnosis, and every diagnosis came with another bill my parents felt honored to pay. Years later, I finally understood the truth. They had created the person they were constantly rescuing from. The time she was a baby, Brianna had been told she was fragile. So fragile became her entire identity, just like never needing anything became mine. Neither one of us chose those roles. We were cast in them long before either of us was old enough to speak. The clearest example I can give you happened during my 4-H awards banquet. The spring I turned 16, I'd won a county ribbon for a raised bed gardening system I had designed completely on my own. It was the first time I had ever been publicly recognized for something I was truly good at. To my surprise, my parents actually came. For a little while, I honestly believed things might finally be different. Then, Brianna called. She was sitting in a parking lot, crying over another boyfriend. Within minutes, dinner was over. My parents left before the awards ceremony even ended. I rode home with my ribbon, resting quietly in my lap. When we walked into the kitchen, Brianna noticed it immediately. Her face crumpled. "Tonight was awful," she whispered, "and you're standing there with a prize. It's supposed to be about me, right now." She didn't say it like an opinion. She said it like a rule, because in our house, it was. My mother made her a cup of tea. Nobody asked to see my ribbon. Nobody congratulated me. I quietly pinned it to the inside of my closet door, because that was where everything that belonged to me had to live. The thing that truly saved me was the dirt when I was 14. I started working weekends at Hollis Greenhouse. I hauled trays, washed pots, pulled weeds, did whatever needed doing. The owner, June Hollis, and I was 63, built like a fence post and completely incapable of giving fake compliments. June paid me with honest wages, eye rolls, and practical advice. Looking back, she gave me more than anyone else ever had. By the time I turned 17, I could run her entire seed room by myself. Every paycheck went straight into my savings account. At First Hartwell Bank, by September, I'd saved $9,112. 3 years of Saturdays. 3 years of sweat. 3 years of believing I was building my own future. One detail is incredibly important. Had opened that account when I was only 14 because I was still a minor. The bank required an adult to be listed as a joint owner. That adult was my mother. When I turned 17, I asked if I could open an account in my own name. The bank teller explained I'd have to wait until I turned 18. Mom smiled warmly. "After your birthday, sweetheart. One thing at a time." She said the same thing. Again in June, then again in August. And I noticed. Want that on the record? I noticed. Something inside me didn't completely trust it, so I quietly began protecting myself. Whenever I cashed a paycheck, I'd take out a little cash. $20 here, $40 there. Nothing that would attract attention. I folded every bill carefully and hid it inside an old coffee tin. tucked behind my winter boots. By September, that tin held $300. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, who watches their own mother? Looking back, I wasn't paranoid. I was simply late to the truth. The rest of my savings remained exactly where they had always been, inside an account with both our names on it, because a 17-year-old couldn't overrule a joint owner, and because some small part of me still believed it was a shared garden instead of what it really was, land owned by someone else, worked by me. The birthday party I planned wasn't extravagant, not even close, just dinner in Grandma Ruth's backyard, string lights hanging from the maple tree, a chocolate sheet cake from Hartwell Bakery, with cream filling, my name written across the top in bright yellow icing, 15 people, a few folding chairs. Even June had promised to come, though she threatened to complain the entire time. That was my dream. Just one evening, one table, one night, where everyone's attention pointed in the same direction, toward me. Dad had promised. For 3 years, I'd carried that promise around like a precious seed packet, checking the date over and over again. My 18th birthday wasn't just another birthday. It was a doorway. I'd already been accepted into the state agricultural program for the spring semester. Beyond that, I could finally picture the future I'd always wanted. A cut flower farm with my own name on the sign. Grandma Ruth was the first person who ever helped me imagine that future. Behind her little house on Maple Street, she grew the most beautiful crimson dahlias I'd ever seen. The variety had been passed down through our family since the year my father was born. The petals were so dark, they looked like velvet drinking in the light. Afternoon that August, she walked me slowly through the rows, then gently tapped one bloom with her finger. Flowers don't apologize for taking up space in the garden. Celeste! Remember that. And I did. I remembered it the way someone remembers discovering an open door without realizing how badly they'd needed one. 3 weeks before my 18th birthday, Brianna announced she had found her 3rd program. This one was a wellness and design semester in Columbus. According to her, it was exclusive, it was important, and most of all, it needed a deposit immediately, or she'd lose her spot to someone whose family actually believed in them. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said those words, because the entire kitchen suddenly went quiet. Not ordinary quiet, the kind of quiet I'd been trained to recognize since I was a little girl. In our house, silence usually meant one thing. Money was about to change direction. Brianna stayed in Columbus for exactly 11 days, just 4 days. Before my birthday, she came home. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning when I heard the front door open. Then I heard her crying. Not ordinary. Crying, the specific kind that meant the entire house was about to rearrange itself around her. By breakfast, everything had shifted. Mom moved through the kitchen like an emergency room nurse, speaking softly into her phone. Dad sat quietly with his coffee, staring at the table. Brianna occupied the center of the couch, wrapped in the family's nicest quilt, explaining how unfair Columbus had been. I made toast. I stayed quiet because that was still my job. Later that evening, I overheard Mom talking to Aunt Patty in the hallway. Her voice had that familiar planning tone. Low dot came controlled the voice she always used whenever she was preparing the Family's official story. 1. Sentence drifted down the hallway. We're just doing what's best for the family right now. Then came another, smaller, quieter, but somehow aimed directly at me. She's got her whole life. For parties. I stood inside my bedroom holding 15 handmade invitations. I'd written every one of them by hand. Each envelope had a tiny dahlia drawn in the corner. I quietly slid them into my desk. Drawer, face down. Some part of me still wanted to believe the math might finally work. After all, a girl only turns 18 once. Surely that mattered more than another one of Brianna's crises. The next morning, Mom knocked gently on my bedroom door. She carried 2 mugs of hot cocoa. The moment I saw her face, I knew. She sat beside me on the bed, smiled gently, then said, "Sweetheart, about Tuesday, not your birthday, just Tuesday." My birthday had already become nothing more than another day on the calendar. Your father and I have been talking. With everything your sister is going through, having a party right now would only rub salt into her wounds. Seeing you celebrate, it would break her. I looked at her quietly, then asked the only question that really mattered. So, what exactly are you asking me to do? She smiled again. We'll just postpone it. Only until Brianna feels stronger. Later we'll do something small. Family only. Later in the Bishop family. That word had a very specific meaning. Later was where all my dreams quietly went to die. For the first time in my life, I asked the question I'd been carrying for years. When is my turn? Mom, I'd really like to see the calendar. Her expression changed for just a second. Then she smiled again and spoke the sentence that would follow me for the next 11 years. Oh, Celeste, don't be so dramatic. You've always been fine. On your own. There it was. The family constitution. Finally spoken out loud. Being fine wasn't a compliment. It was my assignment. It was the price I paid so everyone else's lives could stay balanced. Just then, Dad appeared, quietly in the doorway. He looked at me, and I knew he remembered. 18 is yours. Kiddo, I promise. He opened his mouth. I honestly thought he was finally going to keep that promise. Then, Brianna called from downstairs. Her voice sounded wet, fragile, urgent. Dad hesitated, turned, and walked away. Just like that. Maybe 30 seconds. That's all it took. For a promise I'd carried for 3 years, to completely disappear. As Mom stood to leave, she gently squeezed my knee. You'll understand. Someday, when you have a sensitive child. Then she walked out. I sat perfectly still, listening to the entire house reorganize itself around my sister, 1 floor below. Me? I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. Because if you've always been the strong one, you learn very early that none of those things ever change the outcome. Instead, I quietly opened my laptop and checked the balance in my savings account. I had no idea. The worst part hadn't even happened yet. That evening, the bakery called. They weren't calling to cancel the cake. They were calling to confirm the changes. The girl from Hartwell Bakery sounded cheerful. Hi, I'm just calling to confirm the changes. On order 41, I frowned. Changes. I didn't request any changes. There was a brief pause. Then she read the order back to me anyway, completely unaware that every word was about to change my life. Same chocolate sheet cake, same cream filling, new pickup day, Saturday. and a new inscription, my heart stopped. Instead of, "Happy 18th birthday, Celeste," the cake now reads, "Welcome home, Brianna." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The cake I had chosen months earlier, the one with my name written across the top, hadn't been cancelled. It had simply been reassigned. There was going to be a welcome home dinner. The Saturday after my birthday, almost every guest from my party would still be there. The same relatives, the same folding chairs, the same backyard, the same celebration. The only thing missing would be me. My birthday hadn't been postponed. It had been harvested, piece by piece, until nothing belonging to me remained. I thanked the bakery employee. None of this was her fault. Then I quietly hung up. I stood alone in my room, and something inside me became very, very still. People imagine life-changing decisions happen in explosions. Mine didn't. It arrived like the first hard frost. No wind, no warning, just a silent understanding that nothing else was going to grow there. I walked to my closet, pulled down my 2 duffel bags. I packed my work clothes, my boots, the blue ribbon I'd hidden inside my closet, the 15 birthday invitations that had never been mailed. Then I reached behind my winter boots, pulled out the old coffee tin, and counted the cash without even looking. I already knew every bill by touch when everything was packed. I sat quietly on my bed and made exactly one phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me. Exactly what she'd promised. June Hollis. She listened for less than 10 seconds. Then she interrupted me. "The loft over the seed room has a bed. It's drafty. Rent's $40 a month. You'll earn that before sunrise." Then she paused. "Come. Or don't." That was it. No speeches, no pity, just a door. My 18th birthday was still 3 days away. I didn't wait for it. I left that very night. You know something? Leaving the house you grew up in only takes about 4 minutes. If you've secretly been packing your entire life. I carried 1 duffel bag on each shoulder and walked downstairs. Mum was sitting at the kitchen island, drinking tea. She looked at the bags, then looked at me, and somehow chose annoyance instead of concern. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Celeste. Don't be so theatrical. Where exactly do you think you're going?" I simply answered, "I have work in the morning," which was true. I didn't owe anyone the rest. Across the room, Brianna watched from beneath the quilt. For just a split second, something crossed her face. Not guilt, not relief, almost envy. As though she wished she could be the one walking out the door. Dad followed me outside, on the porch. He quietly pressed a folded envelope into my hand. Inside was $60. Mostly 5s and 10s, the savings of a man who'd clearly been emptying his pockets into a drawer. Whenever nobody was looking, he looked at me, then quietly said, "Call your grandmother every Sunday. She'll worry." He never said, "Don't go." We both heard the words he didn't say. I started walking, 2 miles, under a September sky the color of a bruised plum. When I finally unlocked the greenhouse, the warm smell of fresh soil wrapped around me, like someone genuinely happy I had arrived. The loft was exactly as June had promised. Small, cold, drafty, but it was mine. That night, lying on that narrow bed, I finally understood something that had been true my entire life. Being fine had been the rent I paid to live in my parents' house. That night, I stopped paying. 3 days later, I turned 18. June stuck 1 tiny candle into a grocery store cupcake, pretended she wasn't embarrassed, and sang the shortest birthday song I'd ever heard. It was still the happiest birthday I'd ever had. The very next morning, I walked into First Hartwell Bank. Finally, I was 18. Finally, I could move my savings into an account that belonged only to me. The bank teller smiled, typed in my information, then suddenly stopped. Her smile changed. It became the careful smile people wear when the computer knows something you don't. She slowly turned the monitor toward herself again, then looked back at me. Miss Bishop, the balance is 912s. I blinked. No, that's not possible. She quietly checked again, then explained. Nearly 8,500 had been withdrawn. 3 weeks earlier, right around the exact time Brianna's exclusive Columbus program had needed its emergency deposit, in one horrifying moment, everything finally made sense. After your birthday, one thing at a time, Mom hadn't been delaying the paperwork. She'd been delaying me, keeping the account exactly where it was until she'd finished using everything I'd worked 3 years to build. And here's the part I want you to remember. What she did was completely legal. It was a joint account. Her name was on it. According to the law, she hadn't stolen a single dollar. She had simply spent 3 years of my Saturdays on a dream that my sister abandoned. In just 11 days, I walked back outside the bank, still holding the 912. That remained. I climbed into June's old pickup truck, closed the door, and only then did my hands begin to shake. On the drive back, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her the bank balance. I asked where my money had gone. She didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. Family money goes where the family needs it, Celeste. Your sister's future was on the line. You're young. You're healthy. You'll earn it back. Then her voice softened, almost kindly. That's what families do. I stared through the windshield, unable to believe what I was hearing. Not because she'd taken the money, but because she honestly believed I should thank her for it. I walked back inside the bank with completely steady hands. I withdrew the remaining 912 ways. Then I closed the account forever. By the time Sunday arrived, my mother had already told the family her version of the story. I didn't discover that through gossip. I discovered it through a voicemail. It was from Aunt Patty, my father's sister. Her voice sounded disappointed, almost rehearsed. Celeste, your mother is heartbroken. She says you threw a tantrum over a birthday party, walked out while your sister was having a mental health crisis. Honestly, I'm disappointed in you. I never called her back. Not because I couldn't defend myself, because I finally understood something. Arguing with my mother inside the family was like playing in a way game against someone who had been writing the scoreboard for 50 years. She controlled the story. She always had. So instead of fighting for the microphone, I decided to build a life so honest that eventually it would speak for itself. The first Sunday in October, an old mud-colored sedan pulled into the greenhouse parking lot. Grandma Ruth climbed out slowly. She was 79 years old, leaning on her cane with one hand and carrying a worn shoebox with the other. She walked straight into the seed room, set the box on the potting bench, then opened it. Inside, buried beneath wood shavings, were the ugliest little things I'd ever seen. Knobby, misshapen, brown, dahlia, tubers, the very same crimson variety her family had, protected for generations. Looked at me. You know what these are. It wasn't a question. Then she smiled softly. Plant them somewhere they'll be seen. After that, she reached up, patted my cheek, and quietly left. I made it all the way to the parking lot before I finally broke. And here's something I've thought about ever since. Being betrayed hadn't made me cry. Losing my birthday hadn't made me cry. Even losing 8,500 hadn't made me cry. But one simple act of kindness completely unraveled me. That fall, my entire life became routine. Greenhouse work started at 5:30. Every morning, watering, holing trays, mixing soil, learning every inch of June's greenhouse. When that shift ended, I headed straight to Rosie's Diner, where I worked until 10 o'clock. Every night, serving meatloaf, pouring coffee, smiling through exhaustion. Back in the tiny loft, I'd study gardening, books, until the words blurred together. Succession, planting. Cold hardiness, stem counts, crop rotation, filled notebook after notebook with ideas, crossed most of them out, started again. June always said, crossing things out is part of the job. Eventually, wrote to the state agricultural program, deferred my admission for 1 full year. Officially, it was because of money. Unofficially, everything had changed somewhere between the bank and Grandma Ruth's shoebox. My future had quietly taken a different shape. Meanwhile, across town, my 8,500 had paid for another dream Brianna would never finish, and another bedroom she barely left. Every Sunday, Grandma Ruth gave me gentle little updates. Your sister's resting, your mother's managing, your father's mowings, a lawn that stopped growing weeks ago. That was Grandma's way. Simple, honest, never wasting words. If you've ever worked 2 jobs while someone else lived off everything you sacrificed, you already know exactly what that season felt like. It wasn't dramatic. It was just heavy. And if this story feels even a little familiar, take a second to subscribe, because everything you've heard so far was only the beginning. The ground was finally starting to turn.